I never pictured myself as the hero of a slow-burning melodrama. But here I was, a man in sweatpants, holding what might as well have been the climax of a bad soap opera, my wife's phone. The phrase, "can't wait for our next sweat session," minus the clothes, flashed like a neon billboard of humiliation. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Then I did what any person trained to debug would do. I analyzed. People assume betrayal hits like a tidal wave. For me, it was more like a fault line that slowly widened until the whole ground gave. Sophia wasn't a mystery. She was a spreadsheet of soft edges. We had metrics: 5-year marriage, stable income, family brunches, a shared calendar with date night entries. We were efficient. I was proud of that life. Better yet, I loved being proud of it. The deception wasn't dramatic at first. It was subtle. Smells of unfamiliar cologne. Client dinners, passworded devices, little absences that added up. When she said she was going to a conference and forgot her charger, curiosity and the old stupid impulses I'd always wired into myself collided. I unlocked the phone with our anniversary date because I wasn't thinking, only reacting. The messages from gym buddy Alex were worse than crude. They were intimate, scheduled, organized. There were photos in hotel rooms with timestamps that lined up with her late nights. There were email receipts for weekend stays and notes to her parents asking for cover. Harold's reply read like a resignation. "We understand, sweetie. Just be discreet." Evelyn wrote like a director. "We've got your back." My in-laws didn't just condone. They were collaborators. If there's a pattern to how men break, mine was methodical. I didn't throw anything. Not then. You can't build a case with emotion. I cloned the phone data and started mapping. The digital trail is merciless. It shows who you text, where you booked a room, when a meeting overlapped with a romantic check-in. It shows that client dinner at 9:10 p.m. the same night, Alex checked into a hotel 2 blocks from the address on her calendar. It reveals the choreography. I should rewind here. Before all this, Sophia and I were a classic story. College sweethearts. She studied marketing, I studied computer science. We meshed because she was extroverted, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and collect friends like souvenirs. I was quieter, happier with lines of code than lines of gossip. We evened each other out. She sold me the idea of a future, and I bought in completely. Our wedding was like a movie scene. Beach, sunset, her parents proudly orchestrating every detail, even the color of the napkins. They were overbearing, yes, but I thought it was love. Sunday brunches, holiday dinners, advice about saving accounts and remodeling kitchens. That was our routine. I thought that was stability. Turns out it was staging. Looking back, the cracks started small. She switched from whole milk to skim, stopped drinking wine with me at night, started jogging in new gear she never explained. She'd joke about networking, which I took at face value. The jokes were smokescreens. But back then, I didn't know to look for fire. I believed her when she called me her anchor. I thought anchors meant security, not weight. The night I finally confronted her, I waited until she got home. She smelled of cologne I didn't own, humming like she'd just stepped out of a musical. I had already printed the messages, lined them up on the kitchen table like a poker hand. When she came out of the shower, towel wrapped, I asked calmly, "Care to explain this full-body workout regimen?" Her face drained. "Jake, it's not what it looks like." The most overused line in history. I didn't shout. I just let the silence and the evidence do the talking. She cried, claimed she felt trapped, unappreciated, that Alex made her feel alive. Alive, as though our house, our plans, our history were some half-dead script. The next morning her parents stormed in, as if summoned by invisible strings. Harold, ever the accountant, tried to rationalize. "Now, Jake, affairs happen. Think about the bigger picture." Evelyn played the melodrama card. "We love you both. Maybe counseling could help." Counseling? For betrayal and collusion? I laughed, a hollow sound. I told them exactly what I thought. They weren't guardians of our marriage. They were accomplices. The air grew heavy with their silence. That night, I didn't explode. I planned. Rage is noise, but strategy is structure. I wasn't going to just leave. I was going to make sure the collapse was on my terms. I studied everything. Emails, receipts, timestamps, building a map of deceit that stretched months. When Sophia thought I was sulking, I was gathering leverage. When her parents thought I was sulking, I was drafting outcomes. Betrayal turned some men into victims. It turned me into an engineer of consequences. The first move was simple. I changed the locks. Not a dramatic throwout at midnight, just a quiet swap. Her things went into boxes, neatly labeled, waiting by the door. On top of one, a note. Your new escape hatch awaits. Bon voyage. Not anger, just finality. She found out the next day when her key didn't work. She banged on the door, shouting my name. I didn't answer. By then, I'd already moved half my focus into Phase 2. Phase 2 was Alex. Because Sophia wasn't his only casualty, he was married. That was the lever. That was where his shiny fitness ad smile would start to crumble. I tracked down his wife, not to gloat, but to inform. The screenshots spoke louder than any rant. A quick email with attached receipts, subject line, "For your eyes only." Within hours, she responded with disbelief, then fury. That night, Alex's perfect little double life began to unravel. But before that unraveling gained speed, I stood in the wreckage of my own home, feeling something sharp and crystalline. Clarity. Revenge wasn't about screaming, it was about design. It was about making sure the people who thought they'd played me understood that every move they made left fingerprints. It was about making them see the cost of underestimating a man who lives by patterns and precision. It was about turning betrayal into blueprints. And with those blueprints, I would dismantle everything they thought they controlled, piece by calculated piece. Plans are only as good as their execution. I treat problems like code. Isolate the bug, reproduce the failure, then patch the system so it doesn't break again. Once I'd changed the locks and packed Sophia's things, the next step was practical and cold. Neutralize the other player. Alex was the obvious lever. He'd been sloppy in the ways cheaters often are, repeating patterns, posting polished but consistent images that left a trail. Privacy requires variation. Predictability leaves fingerprints. I followed the fingerprints. Finding his wife took 30 minutes. People who believe they're being discreet forget the obvious places where lives overlap. LinkedIn listed a spouse for corporate photos. Instagram had holiday snaps with family tags. I crafted an email that was precise and merciful. No melodrama, no threats, just evidence. Screenshots, timestamps, hotel check-ins that aligned with dates Sophia claimed to be working late. My subject line was simple. You deserve to know. I sent it, and then I waited with a kind of small, clinical patience. Her reply was instant and devastating. Love, when mixed with embarrassment and betrayal, combusts quickly. She called, voice jagged, demanding details. That call triggered the rest. Alex's world couldn't be contained once his wife filed. Clients who had relied on his image started receiving awkward emails from partners asking about ethics and conflict of interest. In professional circles, ambiguity is poison. Contracts evaporated as partners who once laughed over golf found reason to distance themselves. The man who'd smiled through our kitchen and promised nothing but fitness now had to explain himself in meeting rooms he didn't control. While Alex unraveled, I shifted focus to the in-laws. Harold and Evelyn were not victims. They were facilitators. Harold's reputation came from his volunteer work and the neat columns he wrote for the local paper. Evelyn's social calendar was a currency. Reputation is leverage. Break the ledger, and people start to ask uncomfortable questions. I didn't need to humiliate them publicly. I needed the social scaffolding they stood on to wobble. I started small. An anonymous tip to the nonprofit Harold chaired mentioning potential accounting irregularities. Nothing fabricated, just awkwardly presented data that invited an audit. Audits are brutal mirrors. They don't care about intentions. They care about receipts and signatures. Harold, who'd prided himself on tidy spreadsheets and moral rectitude, suddenly had to explain entries he'd never thought would be questioned. The nonprofit launched an internal review. Board members who'd once defended him now asked about governance. Evelyn's social standing proved easier to erode by osmosis. Bridge ladies talk over tea. A few carefully timed comments at a neighborhood gathering about family matters, and the difficulty of keeping appearances seeded doubt. Invitations dwindled. People who had once accepted her polished presence now exchanged small, curious glances when she entered a room. Social exclusion is a slow, reliable form of consequence. It forces introspection in ways humiliation does not. The point wasn't to crush them. It was to make them taste how fragile reputation is when built on secrets. Sophia's professional fallout required a different hand. PR runs on credibility, and credibility collapses when rumors meet evidence. I approached a couple of her clients indirectly. framed as a recruiter looking for a consultant, and asked casual questions that hinted at ethical risks. When small, cautious clients checked references and found nothing reassuring, they paused on renewals. Word trickled into industry blogs that specialize in people news. PR firms live or die on trust. Once the trust meter flickers, so do contracts. Within weeks, Sophia's calendar looked different. Fewer lunches, fewer after-hours dinners, more defensive calls from colleagues. During all this, I kept my own actions professional and minimal. I had no taste for public spectacle. I filed the separation paperwork quietly and arranged meetings with a lawyer who specialized in equitable distribution. Lawyers like to work with facts. I handed over a tidy package: timestamps, messages, receipts, and copies of notes where Sophia had asked her parents to cover for late nights. The attorney drafted language that protected my interests without turning the divorce into a tabloid circus. The aim was simple: make the dissolution clean, remove the lingering power of secrecy, and avoid giving anyone the chance to manipulate the narrative later. There were nights I sat at the kitchen table with coffee gone cold, watching the city lights and feeling the odd, intrusive satisfaction of watching consequences align. It didn't make me gloat. It made me feel aligned. I had built a life based on rational choices. Now I'd applied rational consequences to those who'd abused that structure. The small victories came in private: Alex's client list thinning, Harold's summoned to explain ledger entries, Evelyn's social invites dwindling. The world didn't crumble theatrically. It rebalanced. Sophia tried to talk her way back into the story. She sent messages that switched between apology and explanation, sometimes packing a kernel of truth, other times reaching for pity. She begged for counseling, for a chance to fix what she'd broken. I agreed to 2 meetings in neutral spaces, partly because I wanted to hear it from her mouth, partly because there's a professional courtesy to letting someone state their case. In both meetings, she was practiced, the same polished voice that closed deals now seeking mercy. She asked if we could consider counseling, presented herself as a woman in confusion rather than collusion. I listened as one listens to a debrief, cataloging inconsistencies. Part of me wanted to deliver a speech that would have satisfied a movie audience. Walk out with thunder, slam the door, declare poetic justice. Reality prefers subtler instruments, so I sold the house instead. There's a cleanness in exchange that feels like catharsis. The keys handed to a new owner, the smell of a staged living room fading as the moving truck pulls away. Selling the house turned a physical space tied to betrayal into capital. I took the profits, seeded the new app concept I had rolling in the back of my head, a tool for pattern detection that would flag suspicious overlaps in a privacy-first way. What began as revenge slowly mutated into innovation. The quiet victory, better than spectacle, was this: I reclaimed my life, not by hurting people publicly, but by restructuring the circumstances that allowed deceit to thrive. I set boundaries, legally and personally. I blocked channels that had been tools for secrecy. I reinforced the parts of my life that were mine: my work, my routines, the quiet weekend rituals I'd share with whoever came next. When the separation was final, there was a small, private moment where the weight that had sat on my chest for months lifted. It wasn't joy. It was a pragmatic relief, like the satisfying click when a troubleshooting session concludes and the system runs clean. Rebuilding is nothing like the drama of revenge. It is quiet, iterative, and oddly technical. I began to code again with focus, to talk to investors about the app's potential, and to spend my weekends mentoring at a local hack meetup. Those small stitches sowed a new kind of life, one where reputation mattered and privacy was respected, where trust required proof, and where consequences were not weapons but guidelines. The hurt still lived in the corners, but it no longer defined the architecture of my days. I had engineered a future that was mine again, and that, more than any public humiliation, was the point. The storm didn't end when the divorce papers were signed. Loose ends have a way of clawing back if you don't secure them. Sophia's parents, desperate to salvage their reputation, began whispering about me in corners of the community. They painted me as cold, calculating, a man who had abandoned their daughter in her time of need. Lies spread easily when truth is inconvenient. I didn't confront them directly. Instead, I let silence do its work while tightening the last threads of my plan. Alex was already gutted professionally, but I wasn't naive. Men like him reinvent themselves. They crawl into new industries, put on a fresh mask, and hope the stink of old mistakes fades. I made sure his reinvention had obstacles. Using the app prototype I'd been building, I fed his name into trial datasets, connections, overlapping addresses, hidden social accounts. The system flagged his attempts to open new ventures under shell names. Each time he tried, his details found their way into the inboxes of investors with subject lines like, "Due diligence findings, proceed with caution." I didn't need to ruin him twice. I just made sure he couldn't con a fresh crowd. Sophia grew restless. She called less about reconciliation and more about money. Her contracts were evaporating. Her reputation inside PR circles had shifted from polished strategist to risk factor. She threatened legal battles, claiming emotional distress, but evidence is a scalpel. My lawyer filed everything neatly. Her messages, her admission of the affair, the receipts showing her parents knew. Judges like clean lines. The ruling came down firm. Division by the book. No alimony. Watching her face across the courtroom as reality sank in was the only spectacle I allowed myself. But the real test was the in-laws. Harold and Evelyn weren't used to being powerless. They had operated for decades on social leverage. Reputation, reputation, reputation. Their audit dragged on for months. When the final report landed, it wasn't catastrophic. No fraud, no theft. But it raised enough questions to damage Harold's credibility permanently. He retired quietly from the nonprofit. His once-weekly columns pulled without fanfare. Evelyn's social standing withered in tandem. Invitations stopped coming. The bridge club still met, but her chair stayed empty more often than not. The silence of exclusion cut sharper than scandal ever could. I didn't celebrate. Celebration is for victories you need the world to see. This was different. This was structural. By the time Sophia realized she couldn't claw back the life she had once flaunted, her safety net was shredded. Her lover discarded, her parents muted, her career poisoned by whispers she couldn't counter. She was forced to move to a smaller apartment on the edge of town, a place where no one cared about last season's gala. That was the outcome. Not fire and brimstone, but gravity pulling her back to earth. Meanwhile, I pivoted. The app, born from Betrayal, grew teeth. Investors saw potential in privacy tech that could detect anomalies without exposing personal data. I called it Veil. Its pitch was simple. Trust, but verify. Patterns tell stories, and stories reveal risks. Where Sophia and Alex had used secrecy to destroy, I would use transparency to build. That irony wasn't lost on me. Betrayal became blueprint. By the time we launched beta, Veil had secured funding that made the old marriage house sale look like pocket change. One evening, months later, I spotted Sophia across the street outside a cafe. She didn't see me. She sat alone, scrolling her phone, face tired, dressed in clothes that lacked her old polish. For a moment, a ghost of the past tugged at me. The version of her that had smiled at me once, hand on my shoulder, promising loyalty. But ghosts are just echoes. I turned and walked away because some endings don't need confrontation. Some endings are better left written in silence. Alex, I later heard, moved states away. His wife finalized the divorce, took their children, and left him scraping together consulting gigs under pseudonyms. The last trace I found was a review on a business forum. Unreliable, avoid. That single line summarized him better than any revenge plot ever could. Consequences had done their work. I had no reason to chase him further. The system was clean. The bug was patched. The in-laws retreated fully. Their once bustling home stood quieter, curtains drawn. Occasionally, I'd catch Evelyn at the grocery store, shoulders stooped, scanning shelves without recognition. The woman who had once sneered at me across her pristine dining table now counted coupons. Harold stopped showing up in public altogether. Reputation had been their currency. Bankrupt, they chose seclusion. I neither pitied nor gloated. Systems fail when they're poorly designed. They had designed theirs on deceit. As for me, life became deliberate. Weekends weren't about dinner parties or business dinners anymore. They became coding sessions, long runs by the river, mentoring young developers who wanted to learn more about digital ethics. The freedom was sharper than revenge. No more second-guessing text messages, no more waiting for lies to slip. Just quiet, steady building. There was one final act, though. Closure, in the truest sense. I wrote a letter, not for Sophia, not for Alex, not for her parents, but for myself. It wasn't angry. It wasn't forgiving either. It was a record, a technical document of sorts, noting the sequence of events, the triggers, the responses, the resolution. I sealed it in an envelope and locked it away in a drawer. Systems need documentation, and sometimes so do hearts. That night, as I looked out over the city lights again, I realized something. Revenge wasn't the destination. It was a transition, a debugging session. What I wanted wasn't their suffering. It was clarity. They had written themselves out of my system through their own choices. I had simply ensured the consequences executed correctly. And with that done, I no longer carried the weight of what they'd broken. The story didn't end in fire, or screaming, or cinematic justice. It ended in balance. They fell. I built. That was enough.